And our first witness is Mr. Carter Roberts. Mr. Roberts is the president and the CEO of the World Wildlife Fund. WWF is supported by close to 5 million members globally, and its affiliates work in more than 100 countries. Before joining WWF, Mr. Roberts worked on strategic planning and new international programs with the Nature Conservancy. We welcome you, Mr. Roberts. Whenever you are ready, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for your leadership in educating the American public and Congress about the threat of climate change and what we need to do about it. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide testimony today on behalf of our 5 million members and on behalf of our programs around the world. As you point out, we operate in all these countries around the world, often with programs led by nationals, leaders in those countries who have a deep appreciation for the context in these countries. And we have an observer status for the UNFCCC process, and often we serve as members of delegations from these countries to the negotiating process. So it's from this vantage point and with this perspective that I offer my testimony today. Conventional wisdom says that developing countries do not take climate change seriously and that they will be an obstacle to a global deal. Nothing could be further from the truth. Key developing countries are taking concrete steps to reduce emissions at home. They are also leading in many ways international negotiations as we speak. For the sake of our climate, our economy, and our international competitiveness, I urge us to follow their lead. I have 3 key points today that I want to make. One is that things have changed. The other is that they've changed for good reasons. And finally, that the U.S. needs to respond in kind both in our domestic legislation and in our international negotiations. So first, throughout much of the 1990s, the developed world looked to developing countries to take the lead in solving the climate change problem. That was clear. Their posture was understandable. They had contributed little in the way of emissions and were suffering some of the greatest impacts, all at the same time that the world's largest emitter was doing very little. Over the past year in particular, developing countries have taken action to reduce their own emissions at home and have been constructive in advancing solutions at an international stage. 2 examples, renewable energy and deforestation or avoided deforestation. Renewable energy standard is a classic part of any country's seriousness in replacing high carbon fuels with ones that produce 0 emissions. During the past several years, as the U.S. has debated whether or not to have a renewable energy standard, Brazil, India, China, Mexico, the Philippines, and many others have adopted their own and have begun implementing it with some success. Second, deforestation. You know that deforestation is the 2nd largest sector in terms of CO2 emissions around the world. More than all the cars, trucks, planes, trains, and boats in the world, bringing Brazil and Indonesia to the top 5 emitters around the world. In December, Brazil announced a bold plan to cut their emissions from deforestation by 70% in 10 years. This would avoid 4.8 billion tons of CO2 emissions, equivalent to over 2/3 what the U.S. produces alone. To back this up, Brazil has made a number of commitments at home. First, they've created one of the most impressive forest conservation programs in the world, creating a series of parks in the Amazon roughly equal to the size of the state of California. Second, they developed a world-class system of monitoring that has few peers around the world and is now regularly reporting on their progress in avoiding deforestation. And finally, they are creating governance systems, particularly at a state level, that provide the resources and the enforcement with local communities to reduce deforestation right at the edge of the forest frontier. Meeting all these goals will be tough. Brazil is committed to it, but it can't do it alone. It will need our help. It will need technology. It will need know-how, and it will need some financial flows to make this happen. The reason these developing countries are taking these steps are pretty obvious. They're very similar to our own, risk and opportunity. The risks that they see are even far greater than ours because They have billions of people who live below the poverty line, and they lack the capital and the financial resources to respond, to adapt, and to change. And so for nations with populations living at a subsistence level, even modest amounts of climate change their water supplies, it changes their food supplies, and runs the risk of severe crop failures. Wait and see is not an option. They also see that addressing climate change produces the promise of economic security and even growth. Dramatic swings in energy prices are problematic for countries with little financial reserves, and those countries who are able to develop homegrown energy supplies are able to become leaders in areas like renewables. Right now, China leads the world in installed renewable energy capacity and is projected to be the world leader by the end of this year in exports of renewable energy solutions. Finally, my last point, the U.S., as we enact cap-and-trade legislation here at home and enter international negotiations, we should do so with developing countries in mind. Why? First, it's a global crisis, and it requires a global solution, just as the economic crisis requires countries to come together. Second, a ton emitted in China or a ton emitted in Brazil is just as costly to us at home as a ton emitted in Ohio. We need to ensure, just as we're creating green jobs at home and sending funds at home to drive solutions, that we also ensure that funds flow to those countries where low-cost solutions can be found. We need to solve the problem by solving it globally. Third, by building the capacity of other countries, we are building more stable societies. We're also building potential markets for technological solutions. For too long, the U.S. has invented renewable technologies, only to see other countries own those markets by having the right regulatory framework and by having good relations and markets with other countries. Last but not least, the U.S. has had a long legacy of reaching out to other countries and solving global problems, bringing our know-how, our capacity, our money, and our resources to help countries in need and to create a leadership role for us abroad. We've done it with HIV/AIDS. We've done it on security issues. We need to do it on climate change. In summary, the developing world has changed as we speak. They're playing a leading role. They're taking action at home. It's time for us, as we pass cap-and-trade legislation here at home and enter international negotiations, to respond to their leadership and to respond in kind. It is in our best interest to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts, very much.